everybody. It is time once again for a 2021-2022 NHL season preview. And today we're going to be talking about the Anaheim Ducks out in the Pacific Division. There's not a whole lot to say about Anaheim right now. Obviously, they are in the midst of a rebuild, and it's really about drafting and development for them. They weren't a very good team last year. They're not expected to really do much this season as well. And it's just all about, young players, adding talent to that lineup, getting those guys NHL ready, and building for the future in Anaheim. They're not really in the same boat as a team, say, like LA or New Jersey, who are kind of taking those first steps to come out of a rebuild. Anaheim is still very much in the midst of theirs. So they didn't make a whole lot of changes this offseason, and it's just more about drafting and developing for the Anaheim Ducks. But we're going to get into it here. Before we begin, I just ask you to please hit that thumbs up and subscribe. It helps the channel so much and is very much appreciated. But before we look forward, we got to look back, and the Anaheim Ducks last season went 17-30-9. They finished with 43 points, which was 8th place, dead last in the West Division. They were the second worst team in the NHL last year, only to the Buffalo Sabres. They had the worst offense in the NHL last season, scoring just 2.21 goals per game. That is obviously an extremely low number. And their defense wasn't really good either, giving up well over 3 goals a game at 3.16. So that's what you get when you have a rebuilding team that's not all that competitive. They weren't good offensively, and they weren't really good defensively either. Their power play was absolutely abysmal, like mind-numbingly bad last season. I had to double take when I looked at this number. I could not believe that this number was so low. They had easily the worst power play in the league last year. It wasn't even close. Only 8.9% on the power play last season. I can't remember ever seeing a single-digit percentage for the power play last year, but it was 8.9%. Not even 1 out of 10 power play chances resulted in a goal. Easily the worst in the league, and that is something that has got to get better. Penalty kill was okay, kind of average, which is a good thing for Anaheim because they were below average in literally everything else. So they had a 79.9% PK, right at 80%. Pretty solid there, average around the league. So that was kind of a bright spot in a season that did not have many bright spots for Anaheim. Moving on now to look at their offseason. Really not much going on here with the offseason. Subtractions list is obviously longer than the additions list. Dan Heinen was not tendered a qualifying offer, so he became a free agent. David Backes retired. He's gone. Hayden Fleury was taken by Seattle in the expansion draft. Ryan Miller retired, and then depth forwards Carter Rowney and Chase DeLeo both became unrestricted free agents. On the addition side of things, they really didn't add much of anything, only some depth players. Buddy Robinson, depth forward. Greg Patterin, a veteran depth defenseman who might even start in the AHL. And then depth forward Danny O'Regan, who definitely will be starting in the AHL. Really no major impact on the NHL lineup. A couple of guys off the NHL roster from last year, but not anything too big. And additions-wise, it was just all depth guys who may not even make the opening night roster. So not much going on here on the additions and subtractions thing. And I'm not surprised by that. Anaheim is not in a position where they're going to be adding big free agents yet. They're still, very focused on building through the draft right now. A team like LA goes out and gets Philip Deneau, and they make the trade for Victor Arvidsson and whatnot, but that's because they're so much further along in trying to come out of that rebuild. Anaheim is not there yet. They're not going to be there for another couple years probably. I would say you're probably going to see bigger moves from Anaheim in maybe the 2023 offseason. But 2021, certainly not. Even next year, I think it's mostly going to be about drafting and getting young prospects in and really good talented players. And then 2023, you might start to see Anaheim trying to make that push. And now it is time to switch on over to my projected roster. And obviously, this is just a projection. There's definitely a few changes that could be made. Some guys making the team, some guys not. But up front, obviously, you've got your veteran guys that are still there. Ryan Getzlav, Ricard Raquel, Jakob Silverberg, Adam Henrique. Those are kind of that veteran core. And then you've got quite a few young guys who have been playing there the past season plus. Max Comtois, Sam Steele, Troy Terry, Max Jones. Those guys are solidified in the lineup. Trevor Zegras, definitely got to see him at the NHL level this year. He's more than ready. Sonny Milano, Derek Grant, Nick Delorier, those are all kind of a little bit older guys. Derek Grant especially quite a bit older, but veteran guys that will kind of fill out some depth. And they've got Alexander Volkov and Isaac Lundestrom who can play as well and have played NHL games. So obviously not a super great lineup on paper, which is why Anaheim struggled the way that they did last season, but very much in a rebuild, in a transitional phase. And it's really all about, guys like Comtois, Steele, Zegras, Terry, Jones, like those guys coming into their own as NHL players. On the back end, your top four pretty well set. You've got Josh Manson, Cam Fowler, Hampus Lindholm, and Kevin Shattenkirk. Those are all veteran guys, solidified NHL players. Jamie Drysdale, 2020 draft pick, much like Trevor Zegras, I think he's NHL ready. You've got to see him at the NHL level this year. It's about letting these young guys learn. He played a few games last year, but I expect a full season of Drysdale in the NHL this season. Then after that, you've got guys like Jacob Larson and Josh Mahura who can play depth roles. We'll see which one's the extra man, which one's in the lineup. If maybe another defenseman comes up and takes that 6th or 7th spot, we'll have to wait and see. But I think the four veteran guys will all be in the lineup, and then Drysdale I think has to be at this point. I mean, You gave him a development year last year. I think at this point, it's him and Zegras are the future of this team, the stars that you are building around. You got to let them learn at the NHL level. Let them get their feet wet. And on a team with very little expectations, it's not going to be a big deal if they don't light it up right away. It's more about just them developing and learning the game at the NHL level. In goal, obviously, John Gibson is the starter, and with Ryan Miller retired, Anthony Stolarz steps into the backup role this year. And obviously, they're going to hope that those two goaltenders can stay healthy. That hasn't always been the easiest thing for John Gibson in particular, but man, they're in trouble if they lose John Gibson. They're not going to be winning many games without him. So, that's their goaltending tandem for this year. Gibson's a good goalie. Obviously, the team in front of him at this point is, a rebuilder, but, if he's healthy, he's going to keep them in games. If something happens to Gibson, they're in big trouble in goal. As far as depth goes, they've got Jacob Perrault, another first-round pick from back in 2020, and he has, I think, a chance to make the team. I wouldn't be surprised if they start him in the AHL and then bring him up later in the year, or maybe just give him another year in the AHL. That wouldn't surprise me, but I do think he has a chance to play NHL games and maybe even make the team out of camp this year and maybe knock out like a Delorier or a Volkov or Lundestrom, someone like that, or even Sonny Milano, although probably not. But he's definitely a guy that will be getting called up if they have guys out of the lineup. Then they've got some more veteran-type depth players like Buddy Robinson, Vinny Laterra, Danny O'Regan. Those are guys that are not going to start at the NHL, but if they run into injury issues, could be getting call-ups. On the back end, veteran Greg Patterin, he's a guy that you could see, obviously a lot of, NHL experience for him. And kind of fallen off over the last couple of years. Probably doesn't make it right away, but it could be a call-up later in the year if somebody goes down with an injury. Cody Curran is an interesting one. I don't really know much about him. He was playing over in Europe, and then he came over and signed and played in the AHL last season with San Diego. Seemed to have a pretty decent year in San Diego, so he's a guy that could potentially take a spot on the NHL roster. And Brendan Gooley, another AHL defenseman who could be called up later in the year if they end up losing somebody to injury. As far as a third goaltender goes for Anaheim, I have no idea. They have 3 goaltenders signed in the AHL, and none of them have NHL experience. So, don't know which of those 3 would be the one to get the call up if something were to happen to Gibson or Stolarz. But Anaheim really needs Gibson and Stolarz to stay healthy and be the tandem this year, because they don't really have much depth beyond that in goal. But that's my projected roster for Anaheim, and there are definitely, as with any rebuilding team, there are definitely some changes that could be made come the start of the season. But we'll have to see how it all shakes out and how the guys play in the preseason. Anaheim, obviously rebuilding team right now. They're not going to win a ton of games this year. Probably going to be a last place team, but they're going to get another really high draft pick most likely. And that's what they're doing right now. That's what they're building, is that they're drafting hopefully well and trying to get some young talent in the organization and then let those guys grow. Obviously, Comtois had a pretty decent year. Max Jones has played pretty well. Sam Steele's starting to come into his own. And then, obviously Zegras and Drysdale are kind of the premier prospects, the future superstars that this team is building around. And they're hoping to get another, year or 2 of high draft picks that will bring in some more superstars in the future and then build from there. But it's the Anaheim Ducks for 2021-2022. Like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. All those links are down in the description. If you'd like to further support the channel, our merch store, memberships, and donation link are down in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you guys soon.